Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry and today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'll be doing my top 10 solo games that I like playing all by my lonesome. First of all, a few years ago, it would have been absurd for me to think that I could make a top 10 list because a few years ago, I hardly played any games solo and actually I wasn't even gravitating towards that idea of playing solo. I really like the social interaction and it's one of my favorite aspects of being in the hobby, and it still is till this day. But somewhere about a year and a half ago, I really started gaining a huge appreciation for the solo play and the value and the brilliance to take a game that, yes, is meant to be played with 2, 3, 4, 5 people, but find a way to make some modifications and some variations to the rules so that it could accommodate a solo play and still feel functional and challenging and stimulating. And that's what all of these games do. Now, I did have about 40 games to consider for this. Yes, 40 games or so to consider. But these are my 10 favorite games to play when I am in the mood to play solo. So, without any further ado, here is my number 10. My number 10 is Xenoshyft Onslaught. This is a deck building, base defense, tower defense style game. Very unique in lots of ways from other deck builders. First of all, you have the fact that this is meant to be a cooperative game, and lots of these games that I have on my list are co-op games that can be played solo. A few of them are competitive games that can also be played solo, but for the most part, I think a lot of these are co-op games that can be played solo. And in this game, what's interesting is, first of all, there's simultaneous turn play in a multiplayer game, so from that perspective, it doesn't even feel any different solo versus multiple players. But also the idea with the deck building that when you acquire cards, they're actually immediately available to you. When you buy a card with your currency, the Xenoshyft, as they call it in this game, it doesn't go to your discard pile to be shuffled and eventually drawn into your hand on a future turn. No, it immediately is available to your turn. So when you're thinking about what cards you're purchasing, you're not necessarily building your deck in terms of this is a good long-term strategy. It's very tactical. You're building your deck according to what you can afford and what you feel you need right now to withstand the onslaught, as the name says it, of these different alien bad guys that are coming and attacking your base or your section of the base. Each player has a special division, right, within the special ops forces that give them a special ability that makes them unique from other players, right? So there is variability as far as that to differentiate you from other players or to differentiate you and your abilities from game to game. Now, this game plays really well solo. The modifications are very simple because basically your tower that you're trying to defend or your base that you're trying to defend has a life of 15 points per player. So it's a simple mathematical equation. Depending on how many players you're playing, you multiply 15 by that number, and that's your base's defense. And you try to withstand 9 rounds of having those alien forces attack you, right? This is a game that's all about survival. It's not about defeating the aliens per se. It's just holding them at bay, keeping them in check as much as possible so your tower does not completely fall apart. But again, I like playing this solo. It's a fun, challenging game. I've never won at it. I've never even made it to the 9th round out of 9 rounds, so I absolutely need to improve. But it's a fun exercise, a fun, stimulating challenge when I play this game solo. My number 10 solo game of all time, Xenoshyft Onslaught. Now we move on to my number 9, and it's going to be a little bit weird for some people, but that is Pandemic. And the reason why Pandemic is in this solo game list, right? This is not a co-op game. It's not because I like controlling multiple characters by myself. No, it's because I play solo with the In the Lab module, solo module that comes in the Lab expansion. So In the Lab is the second expansion that was printed by Pandemic, and it has a solo module which consists simply of one card, and that one card is the CDC, right? The Center of Disease Control. And basically, this in between each of your own turns, the solo player, the solitaire player, the CDC has a brief little turn. They take one action, and you, the human player, chooses from an option of 5 different actions that they could possibly take. And I think it's really, really cool. It's still challenging. There's some ways to modify because normally you would think that a solo game would be super easy because you'll collect all the color sets that you need. But no, you have to discard a certain amount of cards to start the game. So the deck is actually smaller than in your regular games, and also the game length is going to be shorter. You have a shorter amount of time to get to those 5 cards that you need in order to provide the cure for the different viruses. So from a challenging perspective, the challenge is still there. Also, the fact that you're one player and that you really can't cover the whole globe by yourself, right? It makes those outbreaks much more likely, because it's going to be very, very hard to hold back the diseases, to treat the viruses in the different countries and the different cities throughout the world. And yes, one of the possible actions that the CDC helps you with is the moving. They can move you one space on their turn, but that's not going to be enough to make up for the fact that there's no other players helping you out. So it feels very challenging. If you like Pandemic, if you like the puzzle that is Pandemic, which I absolutely do, then I think you would like this solo module. Now, I will admit, I love Pandemic, and even though I love Pandemic a lot, I can't rank this any higher than number 9, because my favorite aspect of Pandemic is the group thing, right? I like to engage with other players and figure things out. I like it when they see things that I don't see, or vice versa. That kind of communication, I feel like it strengthens you as a player. It strengthens you at your team building skills. All these things are very, very important. So I will admit that is lacking, but if you do like the puzzle and the challenge that is Pandemic, then you got to try that solo module in the lab expansion. All right, so my number 9 solo game of all time, Pandemic. Now we move on to my number 8, and my number 8 is One Deck Dungeon. And this game can be played cooperatively as well, but I will say this, as opposed to Pandemic and Xenoshyft, I'll say that this game is better at solo, much, much better at solo. I mean, the game kind of, it feels like it was meant to be solo. I don't know, I got to do maybe a little bit more research on the history of the development of this game, but it sounds to me, or seems to me, that it probably was designed to be a solo game, and the other player or players was just added as an afterthought to make it more, I guess, desirable as a product. But this game is really, really cool. The player takes on the role of a different hero, right? A different character, with a different class, right? I think they're all humans, but they're a different class, and different stats, right? You have your speed, or your agility as they call it. You have your health, which is very important, obviously. You have your magic attack, and you have your sword attack. And all of these are different stats. And you're going through the dungeon, and the dungeon consists of 4 cards that are always on the board. And these are different chambers within the dungeon that you open and reveal by flipping the card over. And there is a encounter on the other side. You either have a peril encounter, which is some obstacle or challenge you have to overcome, or you have a combat encounter, which is some bad guy, some monster you have to defeat. And every time you successfully accomplish these encounters, you're always going to successfully encounter them. Every time you do successfully encounter them, you're going to get the card as a reward. And the card is a multi-purpose card. You can choose what you want it for. You could either use it as experience points, so that you could use those experience points to eventually level up your characters, which add their capacity of weapons and equipments and skills that they can carry on to. But you can also choose to use those cards as an item, right? As an equipment, which adds to their stats, potentially their agility or their physical combat or their magic combat or even their life. Or you can use them as a special once a round skill that you add to your hero that the hero will always have available going forward. Or you can use it as a spell, which if you have potion cubes, you could use occasionally, as long as you have the potion cubes to spend. So factoring all these things in is really, really cool. You go through the deck 3 times, each time representing a different level of the dungeon. And finally, after you're done with that 3rd time, if you're still alive to tell the story, you delve in a little further, a little deeper to fight the mastermind or the overlord. And there's like 5 or 6 different masterminds that come with the game, 5 or 6 corresponding dungeons that come with the game, each with their different challenges. You're rolling dice. That's basically what the stats do. They determine how many dice you roll within the different colors, which correspond with the different skills or different stats. And you're trying to use those dice to place them on these different spots that have numerical values that you need to reach with the dice that you're placing there. So it's a little bit of dice placement. And if you successfully block those spaces, you will accomplish the encounter without any casualties. But if you leave a few of those spaces unblocked, then what happens is you deal or incur whatever damage it is. Either it incurs damage in life for you, health, you lose some of your hearts, or it makes you spend time, right? And time is a very important thing to manage in this game, because on every turn you're flipping over 2 cards to indicate the passage of time. And sometimes, again, when you're unable to block those spots, you're gonna have to flip over more cards. And the quicker you go through those cards, the quicker you're forced to proceed to the next level of the dungeon, right? And you might not be ready yet. Your character might not be strong enough to deal with that level 2 dungeon, right? So you're factoring all these things as you're making your decisions, and also the luck of the roll, but there are lots of ways of mitigating the dice roll in this game. My number 8 solo game of all time, One Death Dungeon. And now we move on to my number 7 solo game, and that is Lord of the Rings, the living card game designed by Nate French and published by Fantasy Flight Games. This is a very, very fun game to play solo. Again, like One Deck Dungeon, I would say this game plays better solo. Pandemic and Xenoshyft, I like them as solo experiences, but they are better as co-op experiences. Lord of the Rings, I feel like it's meant to be a solo game. I don't even want to play this game with other people. I love the Lord of the Rings IP, the universe that this game brings you into. I love how it plays mechanically, your hand of different heroes and allies and attachments that you're managing, all in the efforts to summon up enough willpower to accomplish these different quests, to put quest tokens on the different quests that you're trying to complete, but at the same time withstand the onslaught of different enemies that you're going to be engaging with, right? These enemies are very terrifying, they're very powerful, and unless you have the right amount of heroes and allies on your tableau and they're active and they're ready to engage in those combats, you're not going to endure the damage that they're going to cause, and then that's going to lead you to losing heroes, and losing heroes leads to you losing your income, because the way you are able to play for cards or play down cards going forward is by spending your money, and your money is acquired at the beginning of each round for your different heroes. So managing all that, the resource of your money, the placement of your cards, capitalizing on whenever you're lucky enough to get your Gandalf into your hand, all of those things are really fun. There's tons of quests, tons of variability. I have not even scratched the surface with the base game. And there's so many little expansions and big expansions out there. My number 7 solo game of all time, Lord of the Rings, the living card game. Now we move on to my number 6. And my number 6 is Elder Sign, and this game is designed by Richard Launius and Kevin Wilson, also published by Fantasy Flight Games. And this is a co-op game that can accommodate anywhere up to 8 players. I don't want to hear about it. I don't even want to think about that high of a player count for this game. This game is a little bit long as a solo game. Imagine so much more with 6, 7, 8 players. I haven't played this game co-op yet, but I have a hard time believing that I will like it more co-op. Just like Lord of the Rings, just like One Deck Dungeon, I feel like this game shines at 1 player, even though it can accommodate 8. This game, you're rolling dice. It takes place in the Cthulhu mythos, the H.P. Lovecraftian world, where players are a group of detectives, or in the case of a solo game, just 1 detective. In this case, in the museum, trying to close portals to the other worlds, trying to acquire as many elder signs as possible in their attempts to defeat the Ancient One before the Ancient One awakens. There's a bunch of different Ancient Ones, a bunch of different investigators that players can play through. Very, very abstracted as far as gameplay is concerned, but some really cool narrative text and flavor text on the different cards that kind of, if you play solo, can put yourself in that mood. You could put yourself in that world. That's another thing. Sometimes it's easier to thematically immerse yourself into a game experience if you are by yourself. Especially if the game is a little bit abstracted like this one. This is a roll and lock type of game where you're rolling dice and you have to choose one of them or even more per every roll, either to complete the different tasks that are on the different room cards in the museum, or to discard them because you failed to roll what you needed. But every time you roll your dice, you're getting rid of at least one of them. And you have a bunch of 6 basic green colored dice, but there are different items, unique items and common items that you're acquiring throughout the game that let you roll an additional yellow or even maybe an additional red die, which are a little bit more effective and efficient than those plain basic green dice. Again, I have a fun time playing this game solo. The abstract nature of it, the lack of thematic integration would actually make me probably enjoy it less within a group setting. But as a solo game, it's a really cool exercise. My number 6 solo game of all time, Elder Sign. And now we move on to the top 5, my friends. This is the cream of the crop. And my number 5 is Tiny Epic Galaxies by Scott Alms and Gamelin Games. Probably my favorite Tiny Epic game between this and Tiny Epic Western. But I will say that this is definitely my favorite one to play solo because the automa in this game is so legitimate. And you have 5 different automa players that you could choose from with varying levels of difficulty, all the way from very easy to very hard. So it's all a matter of how good you feel like you are, right? I think I'm playing like at the second to easiest level at this point, because I'm still not that good. But it's such a fun game. Again, you're rolling dice. This game can be played competitively. As a matter of fact, out of all the games I've presented so far, this is the first game that can be played competitively. And that's why you're technically not playing against the game, but instead you're playing against an artificial intelligence, right? An AI automa player who serves in the place of a human opponent. But it's so cool because you're rolling dice, and each is kind of Yahtzee style, but you only get one free reroll. But you do have some currency, I think it's energy, that you use and you could pay to reroll additionally, right? If you have enough energy to spend. And all of these rolls let you do different things. This is a space-based game. It's kind of like a little tiny 4X style of game. You're trying to colonize different planets, and you're engaging occasionally in conflict with your opponent. But for the most part, in this automa play, it's really your opponent who attacks you, right? The automa player has a few different spots that, based on one of the sides of the die, every time it's triggered, it does some type of damage to you. It hurts you, it takes something away from you, it adds something to itself at your expense. But it's really cool because mainly you're just trying to colonize these different planets that once you colonize, you add to your galaxy, your intergalactic empire. And these cards not only give you victory points, but they also give you special abilities that you could trigger going forward. Really cool, the different cards and the different abilities, because sometimes you could choose to send one of your ships to a planet to either colonize it or to use its special one-time ability. And it's all a matter of what makes most sense to you at the moment. Very fun game, cool playing multiplayer, but also really cool playing solo. My number 5 solo game of all time, Tiny Epic Galaxies. And now we move on to my number 4. And my number 4 is Race for the Galaxy, designed by Thomas Lehman and published by Rio Grande Games. Again, this is another competitive game like Tiny Epic Galaxies that has a automa player or AI opponent, but it's really cool. You need, actually, just like Pandemic, to play Pandemic solo, you need the expansion, the In the Lab expansion. To play Race for the Galaxy solo, you absolutely need to get the Gathering Storm expansion, because that provides everything for you. It provides a little board that you use for the solo mode. It provides the different potential AI players, just like Tiny Epic Galaxies. You have maybe like 4 or 5 different opponents that you could compete against. And it also gives you the dice. Yes, it introduces dice to this game, where the dice determine the particular actions that the AI player is going to take. Really, really cool. The AI player in this game is so competent, which is what I look for in an AI player. I do not want to toot my own horn and boost my own self-esteem and pat myself in the back in vain because I happen to beat the AI dummy player over and over and over again. I want a challenge, and that's absolutely what the solo module from the Gathering Storm expansion provides. I love Race for the Galaxy. I prefer having a human opponent, just like I would for Tiny Epic Galaxies and any game. As a matter of fact, with the exception of One Deck Dungeon, Elder Sign, and Lord of the Rings, yeah, for the most part, I do want to play these games with other people. And definitely Race for the Galaxy falls in that category. But the solo variant is almost as good. It's so fulfilling. As a matter of fact, I lose more often to the dummy player than I used to human players, you know, just to toot my own horn, as I mentioned. So really fun game. The fact that you have to factor in and you know the inclinations of all the different automa players, but at the same time, the roll of the die is still going to determine what their actions take. So there's a little bit of predictability, but again, there's a little bit of spontaneity that you cannot account for. You have to be ready tactically, and you have to be sound. You cannot hope to make less mistakes than your opponent, because your opponent is an artificial intelligence that probably will make less mistakes than you. Really balanced. Again, very competent solo variant, solo mode from the Gathering Storm expansion. My number 4 solo game of all time, Race for the Galaxy. And now we move on to my number 3. And these 3 were actually very, very tough because I like playing them solo a lot. My number 3 is Runebound 2nd edition. I do like playing Runebound 3rd edition solo, but I don't like it nearly as much solo as Runebound 2nd edition. First of all, really, really cool because there's basically no engagement in this game with players. It's kind of like a multiplayer solitaire for Ameritrash. So I don't mind the fact that I played solo. It makes it for a quicker experience, and it's all about, can you beat Margath, the High Lord Dragon, before the game ends, right? And there is this ticking time bomb mechanism that is called the Doom Track that gives you a limit as to how long you can go on adventures, go on quests, and level up your characters, right? You cannot level them up indefinitely, or else you could extend this game length to a drastic amount of minutes, and also pretty much assure yourself that you're going to be able to defeat the High Lord Margath because your character will be so leveled up. No, you have a time factor, and you have to factor that in, and boom, once that Doom Track reaches its final spot, you are obligated and forced to go through the red quest deck or the red adventure deck until you fight Margath, the High Lord Dragon, and see if you could beat him or if you're defeated in the process. Really cool, lots of amazing mechanisms in the game, fantasy themed, lots of storyline, you know, throughout all the different aspects of the gameplay, the different cards, the heroes, the market cards, the adventures that you go on to, the events that you trigger, the social encounters you have. All of these things are dripping with flavor text and narrative text that add to the storyline factor. And again, from a solo perspective, it just plays nice and smooth with no interruptions at a pretty good clip, because all you have to do is wait for yourself, right? My number 3 solo game of all time is Runebound 2nd Edition. And my number 2 is Robinson Crusoe. And this is this is designed by Ignacy Trzewiczek and published by Portal Games. This is another co-op game, but of the other co-op games, I feel like this game, I really like it solo. While I enjoy the facts of team building and group thinking and brainstorming and all those things are criteria that's very important to me in a cooperative game, I feel like in this game, first of all, the way I play, I always control Friday or Half Friday and the dog available to me. You're a group of castaways trying to accomplish different scenarios and accomplish different objectives based on those scenarios, and at the same time withstand the weather effects on the island, withstand the wildlife in the island, feed yourself, provide for shelter so that you can withstand those elements, and at the same time accomplish whatever the objective you know, is for that scenario. But you have additional dummy characters like Friday and the dog that you can use to help you, especially if you want the game to be a little bit easier. So I play with those characters when I play it cooperatively anyways. So when I play solo, it makes it pretty easy because I just basically on my own figure out what I want to do with the dog, what I want to do with Friday, and what I want to do with myself, right? And, you know, it is a little bit harder when you play solo. It is good to have more players that you can do a little bit more with. But again, just from that perspective, the fact that there's a lot going on in this game, there's a lot of, you know, card reading and card flipping and so much things that are going on. Lots of narrative text in this game as well. So it's very immersive from a storyline perspective. But again, it just plays really, really smooth solo. I love the exercise. I love figuring out the challenge or the puzzle of whatever the current scenario is on my own. Great co-op game, great solo game. My number 2 solo game of all time, Robinson Crusoe. And now we move on to my number 1. And I absolutely love this game. And my number 1 game is Marvel Legendary. And this game can be played solo, it can be played cooperatively, it can be played semi-cooperatively, it can even be played competitively. And I like playing it in all of those fashions. I'm not sure. It might just be that solo is my favorite way to play this game. I love this game. First of all, I'm a huge Marvel nerd. I've been loving Marvel since I was a very young boy, very young kid. I love the deck building mechanism. This is the game that didn't introduce me to deck building, but really made me fall in love with deck building and really made me fall in love with the gaming world, the board game world, I should say. This game is so much fun and there's so much variety. I have so much content here in this game. Tons of expansions. I have a bunch of expansions that are not here. And from a variability perspective, there's so much stuff going on. But again, playing solo, and there's a bunch of ways. You have the official solo rules to play that the game provides for. I actually don't play that way. I actually play either controlling 2 characters, which is rare, it's unheard of. It's the only game that I ever play solo controlling 2 characters, right? All these other games that I mentioned playing solo, I always control 1 character, or else I don't really consider it solo. So sometimes I do play this game controlling 2 characters, or I play with a fan-made variant, which if you want to check my playthrough of Marvel Legendary, it's actually with that fan-made variant from a user on Board Game Geek. His name escapes me right now. But the point is that the way that game works is you still keep your full 5 heroes available to you in the headquarters, and also 2 villain groups in the villain deck. So you still prepare the game as if it were a 2-player game, but every time you flip over a card from the villain deck, instead of flipping over 1 card, you flip over 2. And also the heroes are 1 hero, the leftmost hero from the headquarters, is always discarded at the beginning of each round. So you can't count on just saving up to buy certain heroes. So those 2 factors add to the challenge of the fact that you've added a bigger villain deck and you have more heroes available. So it keeps the game balanced as far as the challenge is concerned. But at the same time, it's a way of playing with the maximum amount of content, right? Because the way the official rules work is you only play with 3 heroes and 1 villain group. And I like playing with a lot of the content. So that's why I play either with that variant or, again, controlling 2 characters depending on how I'm feeling. But again, this game is really, really fun to play. Setup and takedown is one of the knocks on this game. It takes a while to set up all the different hero cards and villain cards and all that stuff to make the respective decks, and putting them back and organizing them even takes longer. So that's another benefit of playing solo, right? Because sometimes when I'm playing with other people, I'm thinking about things like setup and takedown, because I know that other people might not have the same patience as I for preparing these games, and I want to get these games to the table as quick as possible and as smoothly and efficiently as possible to not take away from people's time. When I'm playing solo, it's all good. I take my time. I figure out what cards I want, what heroes I want, what villains I want. If it takes forever, it takes forever, because it's just my time and I'm playing solo, and I even find that stuff therapeutic. But if you like Marvel, if you like deck building, if you like storyline within your deck building games, then this is a good option for you. My number 1 solo game of all time, Marvel Legendary. And that's it, folks. Those are my top 10 solo games of all time. Comment down below. Tell me, what's your favorite game to play solo? Have you played any of these games solo? Which ones are your favorites? Which ones would you like to try from my list? I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. This is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.